Now we're going to turn to two individuals who built on the theoretical work of Dilthey and actually did applied research in psychology using Dilthey's hermeneutic methods. And that's Edward Spranger and Karl Jaspers. And as we'll see, Spranger worked primarily in areas of adolescence, researching German adolescence, as well as researching types of personality or personality typology. And Jaspers was a psychiatrist who focused mostly on psychotherapy and psychopathology through the hermeneutic lens. Spranger felt that we were better able to analyze, to understand others than we are to understand ourselves. And he put forth two methodological statements. The first is that we can see others in the context of their history and their social structure, whereas the individual themselves are not able to do that as effectively as we are outside of that individual. We have we might call it a more objective view of the individual and their social context. Spranger also said that it wasn't empathy, but the connections between the individual's world and their unconscious that was to be studied. This sounds a little bit like psychoanalysis, and I think there are some similarities here. When we look at not what the individual's thinking, but the constructions that are made in their thought, how these thoughts make sense of the world. This is really what seems Spranger's after. And to understand that there are motivations beyond what the individual can consciously be aware of. That's something that Spranger said we can see from outside of ourselves, and it might even be something that would be universally human. So when, for instance, if you ask a child why the child plays, they might say because it's fun. But if we understand in a bigger historical construct how play aids in processing of social interaction and preparing for future social interactions, etc., this is a way of seeing these connections that the child themselves wouldn't be able to see. And this holds true for adults as well. An adult might not be fully aware, fully conscious of the reasons that they're doing what they do. So there are similarities here with Freud's concepts of unconscious in the psychoanalysis. Spranger's personality theory research, personality types, is something we don't find in our theories of personality courses, at least not in the textbooks. Professors might add it. But Spranger came through his research to identify what he called 6 different personality types. He was careful to point out that we aren't exclusively one of these, but one seems to dominate, but we can be a mixture of the 6. But there seems to be a certain way of being that satisfies a need of personal fulfillment for an individual. And the first type that he identified was the theoretic type. And this is an individual who's after big T truths. These are scientists and people who privilege and take they find the most important aspect of life to be an objective, logical, scientific worldview, looking for big, ultimate, lawful truths, trying to arrive at fact. And we find this often in the science type individual. We also incidentally find this in some different, more analytical philosophers. Economics and the economic type individual is looking at the world in a utilitarian way. This might be an individual who would only assess the value of doing something like writing a song or making a painting for its commercial value, for how much it would be worth in making you money or making a profession. So these are individuals who look at everything in life as in a utilitarian cost-benefit analysis kind of way. So this goes beyond just a bit like the business person, but seeing everything in life as a sort of cost-benefit analysis. This is how they see value in things. The aesthetic type is the individual who finds their fulfillment, the fulfillment in their life through creativity, through making things. And this is not making things in order to sell things necessarily. This is just the act of creating artistic creation. We see social type. This is an individual who takes the most meaning in life, finds most fulfillment in social relationships with others, friendships, things of this nature. The political personality type finds great interest in power and the relationships of power over other people. This is also a very utilitarian social view. This is seeing people as in respect to power structures. And the religious individual, religious type, takes a sense of meaning, finds meaning in life through some sort of transcendence with a divine power of higher value, God, and this can be mysticism. It can be more religiosity. So these are the categories that Spranger identified through his descriptive research. So Spranger wanted to look at adolescence, and in particular German adolescence, in the 1920s, late 1920s. And he didn't feel that it would be practical for psychology to be entirely individual. So in other words, a description of each individual, although that's what we do in psychotherapy. Spranger was looking to see if he could identify typical characteristics of German adolescence. And he was very specific to say that his analysis was culturally and historically tethered to Germany in the 1920s. This is who he was speaking of, adolescence in Germany in the late 1920s. So he's looking for the typical German adolescent characteristics. And he found that some of the characteristics of adolescent psychological structures were the search for a discovery of identity, a discovery of the self, an emergence of a life plan, like planning ahead, trying to have an idea of one's future, and testing out different areas of life, ventures into different domains of life. And we see that these are all characteristics that are later spoken of by Erik Erikson in his 8 stages. This is very typical of the adolescents. Spranger said, unlike most of the research that was taking place at the time, which was biologically driven, talking about hormones and physiological development, he said that biology might have its interesting pieces of information, but we can't rely on this natural science approach exclusively. We have to understand things in their significance. He said that biology tells us nothing about some of the typical feelings that he found in adolescence, including loneliness and isolation, radicalism, and tendencies towards idealization. So this is some brief overview of some of the work that Spranger did on adolescence to give us an idea of his hermeneutic approach based on the outline that Dilthey had put forth. Now, Karl Jaspers, who is a psychiatrist, is also a link to our upcoming topic of existentialism. He's also a figure in existential analysis, existential psychotherapy. He's a German philosopher and psychiatrist, and he's interested in the question of psychopathology. And he said that we needed a psychopathology theory that extended beyond causal natural science, but also took into account understanding, and this is where he embraced phenomenology. So he wasn't dismissing the causal attitude of natural science. He wanted to incorporate phenomenology with the causal natural sciences. So he said we not only have to understand the causes of psychopathology, but we have to understand the individual's experience. And he this is referred to as nosology, understanding this from the medical perspective, but he said we also needed idolatry, which is the cultural and psychological aspect plus the person's biography, their personal history. So we have almost like a psychosocial, biopsychosocial model here. And he was an individual who did not propose an entirely idiographic or individual study, but this is why he looked towards phenomenology. Phenomenology isn't looking simply at a subjective individual experience. Phenomenology is stripping away the individual experience to find the essence of the thing in itself. And so this was a phenomenological approach. So we're going to, again, be discussing phenomenology more in depth next. But keeping this in mind, this is our bridge from hermeneutics to phenomenology and existentialism through Karl Jaspers. So Jaspers put forth what he called 5 hermeneutic considerations for clinical psychology. So these are 5 different ways of understanding. First, he talked about phenomenological understanding, which is it's the patient's experience as they self-report. Then understanding of expression is kind of like when we look in Gestalt therapy of Fritz Perls and also the work of Wilhelm Reich, looking at physical body language during the person's talking. So not just listening to the words, but looking at what the body is saying, where the body is saying during the clinical interaction. Also static understanding, which is looking at certain psychological qualities such as anger and fear and joy, so emotions. Developmental understanding, this is referred to as genetic genesis, meaning developmental understanding, looks at how the psychological events form a chain of emergence, say from depression to feeling anxious, anxiety over one's depression, or feeling depressed because of one's anxiety, these sorts of ideas. So very contemporary ideas that are used today. And then rational understanding, which is how the person describes what they're thinking about, the cognitive understanding of their thought, how they make sense of their situation. So these are the 5 hermeneutic forms of understanding that Jaspers describes. Jaspers is also quite interested in what he refers to as methodological pluralism, which means taking a hermeneutic approach, not just a singular biological approach. He said that all neurosis stems from a failure in marginal situations. So what is a marginal situation? It's anything that pushes an individual to a sense of uncertainty, dying, suffering, guilt, things of this nature. So maybe ambiguous situations, difficult to cope with. These are marginal situations. This is the place from which neurosis stems. He also said that authentic existence comes from learning how to cope in these marginal situations. So in Jaspers, we see this link that's often made into phenomenology and into existentialism, and that's where we'll turn next.